It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Robin Westman has been identified as the mass murderer who shot 20 school children today at the Annunciation Parish Church in Minneapolis. Israel was quick to offer its solidarity with the Catholic community, even though this day they destroyed yet another Catholic church in the Holy Land, having already shot priests and parishioners by the dozen. And unusual movements of Russian nuclear weapons at their nuclear weapons facilities deep in the mountains of the Urals. And it's revealed here on the mother of all talk shows that the United States has deployed thermonuclear weapons capable of being dropped by the F-35A fighter bombers that are stationed at RAF Lakenheath in Surrey. And, well, do you need any more happy days, huh? It's going to be the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Unspeakable evil, depravity, degeneracy stops all the Western countries in particular. The evil that is abroad is scarcely to be believed, belonging as it does in the worst dystopian novels of yesteryear. No one could have predicted the kind of evil we saw in the Gaza Strip this week, where a double tap, or as the BBC put it, a double strike. They only use double tap when it's an enemy country that's doing the double tapping. Slaughtered medics, rescue workers, and of course, journalists, 6 of them murdered on one day in a double tap deliberately carried out in broad daylight and live on television. Israel first said it was a mishap, I think was the word that Netanyahu used. You know, losing your car keys or stubbing your toe could easily be described as a mishap. But that's what Netanyahu called the mass murder of at least 20 people in a hospital. The hospitals they used to claim they would never bomb, just before they destroyed every single last hospital in Gaza. The hospitals they used to claim were hit either by Hamas rockets or by, well, a mishap. Well, this was no mishap, because as the Israeli media, always reliable in a way that Western media simply is not, to tell the truth, says that it was a deliberate targeting and that it was green-lighted at the highest level of the military command. And, moreover, Netanyahu's tune has changed. They thought it was a Hamas camera. Now, I've heard of Leica, I've heard of Sony, I've heard of all kinds of cameras, but a Hamas camera is a new one on me. Not only are the children in Gaza murdered because, well, if they're not Hamas now, they'll grow up to be. Even the cameras held by the journalists in press vests are now described as Hamas cameras. What can you say about the evil in Minneapolis? We don't know much yet about Robin Westman, but I'm accentuating his name because there are people out there who are desperate for these kind of crimes to have been committed by a Muslim. Well, this one definitely was not. I don't want to fuel speculation as to the motives of this mass murderer. No doubt more will come out in the hours and days to come. But he was no Muslim, bruv. He carried out mass murder on little children, celebrating mass to open the new school year at the parish of Asuncion in Minneapolis. What kind of mental illness is that? What kind of fanatic politics is that, if indeed politics were in any way involved? One thing is for sure. The United States is looking more and more like a banana republic, as indeed is the United Kingdom. Oscar Wilde said we were two countries divided by a common language. But actually we are increasingly united, not just by our common language, but by the common dysfunctionality of our political systems. When we've got Nigel Farage as Prime Minister, as at the current rate of opinion poll ratings, we'll have Trump on one side of the Atlantic and we'll have Nigel Farage on the other, who will immediately begin the Trumpification of the United Kingdom, killing the very last vestiges, and they are the last, and they are only vestiges of civilization in our country. The American ambassador to Lebanon was fond of the word civilization and animalistic in his disastrous press conference in Beirut this week. He has a team in Lebanon. No one's quite clear why. No one's quite clear what Lebanon has to do with him. And nobody at all is clear why Lindsey Graham is a part of the ambassador's team. But he waded into this press conference and lectured the Arab journalists present as uncivilized and animalistic. Now, I don't know exactly how old you would place American civilization. If civilization it is, after today's events in Minneapolis. I'm reminded of Mr. Gandhi's famous riposte when asked by an American journalist what he thought of Western civilization. He replied, "Yes, I think that would be a good idea." But if you are of a mind to trace Western American civilization to the conquest of North America by primarily, in the first instance, Anglo-Saxon settlers, joined by European settlers from virtually all European countries, if that's the beginning of your civilization. Let me tell you that Iraq had the world's greatest library when our people were painting their faces blue and living in the forest. When the Mongol hordes invaded Baghdad and sacked the city, it's said that the river Tigris turned two colors within that very day. First, black with the ink of the greatest library that was destroyed by the hordes, and then red with the blood of its defenders. The idea that any plenipotentiary of the United States of America can lecture anybody, never mind the Arab people, about civilization and about animalistic behavior is not just almost incomprehensible, it is, insofar as it's comprehensible, the root of the Orientalist attitudes which have disfigured so much of the world. But it's not just the peoples of the East of the globe. It's the peoples of the East of Europe. If you look at a pattern of the people murdered in the 20th century by war, by wars and invasions, the overwhelming majority of them are Slavic people. Hitler was determined to completely annihilate, to eliminate all the Slavs of Europe once he had worked to death those that were physically capable of such work. Those that were not were to be marched into the Zyklon B showers in the death camps and massacred, annihilated, because they wanted no extra mouths to feed. And I mention that because Poland has at last joined, maybe it's the recent political changes, has at last realized that the Ukrainian nationalist fronts that they have been supporting and facilitating throughout this last 11 years of war in Ukraine are the same people that massacred 1 million Poles, 1 million Poles, hundreds of thousands of Jews in the Holocaust of the East, and that the foundational figures in that Ukrainian nationalist government, Bandera being only the most preeminently evil, are the very people who could not wait for the SS to arrive before they began to fall upon their neighbors in the western part of Ukraine and annihilate them, massacre them, up close and personal. No gas chambers, no death camps, just a bullet in the back of the head if you were lucky, having been stripped and raped if you were a female. The fact that we have destroyed the entire European economy in support of these people would be, as I said, almost incomprehensible, except that new documents emerged this week which demonstrated that Britain and the United States secretly transferred 9,000 SS fighters from the Ukrainian Galician brigades to Canada. To Canada, part then of Britain's dominions, were secretly transferred. They took off their SS uniforms. Then Britain and America secretly transferred them to Canada. And one of them, you may recall, ended up getting a standing ovation in the Canadian Parliament for having fought the Russians during the Second World War. I'm not making this up for younger viewers. Check it out. He got a standing ovation from Trudeau, from all parties. Standing ovation because he had fought the Russians during the Second World War. It didn't dawn on any of them. If he was fighting the Russians in the Second World War, he was fighting on the side of the Nazis. I mention all of this because I now discover that the welfare state in Germany can no longer be afforded, says the Chancellor, Herr Merz. This is a country that has given billions, tens of billions of euros to Zelensky in Ukraine, much of which he has stolen. He has a property portfolio, according to his former head of anti-corruption, of 1.5 billion euros. Of course, she says, on paper, Zelensky has nothing. But in reality, her words, Zelensky has everything. Tens of billions have been given by Germany to Zelensky, much of it stolen, and now Germany announces it can no longer afford its welfare state. The British people, under a so-called Labour government, are being prepared not just for yet another tidal wave of austerity, but a cap-in-hand trip to the IMF in Washington for a bailout. We have no money to keep energy bills down, to repair the absolute decrepitude of our country, our society, and our economy, but we are so flush with money that we cannot give enough of it to the chiseling little crook, the thief of Kiev. This week, the head of the British Army and the head of the British Air Force were both in Kiev in talks with little Zelensky about how yet still more of our money and, if necessary, more of the blood of our brave young men and women in the armed services can be shed, can be burned in the cause of Bandera, of the people of the Holocaust of the East, of the Einsatzgruppen, of the SS flags, emblems, death heads, Sieg Heil salutes, jack boots. How did we end up in this situation? Well, no doubt our excellent guest tonight will help us understand it. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is still throwing weapons into the slaughter in Ukraine. It now turns out that Ukraine has lost 1.7 million men. Not my figures, their figures. 1.7 million. This is World War I levels of casualty. Missing in action, killed in action, permanently disabled, deserted, 250,000 deserted, 1.7 million. 9 million Ukrainians living at other people's expenses in impoverishing Western European countries like Ireland, like Britain, like Germany, they're dragging people in front of their children by the hair to the front lines, whilst millions of them are living in our countries, paid by us, living in hotels, fast-tracked through the airports, and the better off of them driving the very best cars in Europe, hanging out in the very chicest places. How, I ask again, did we get to this situation? There's so many flashpoints right now that both Larry Johnson and Colonel Douglas Macgregor will be hard pushed to get through them all. We're facing the real possibility of all-out war, hypersonically ballistic war between Iran and Israel. And for Israel, read America. Any time now. The Russians have evacuated their embassy from Tel Aviv. The Americans have evacuated their military bases in Iraq. It could happen tonight or tomorrow. War in Ukraine is the reason why the Russians are moving their nuclear weapons and why the United States has secretly installed thermonuclear weapons on British soil in secret, undeclared, with no parliamentary approval or even discussion. No member of parliament has told you what I've just told you. England, Lakenheath, is now nuclear war central. What's it all about? Let's hear what Larry Johnson thinks coming up right after this. There's a legend on the line in Oklahoma. It's May on Trump. Welcome back, May.
Trump is using a magic 8-ball to make his decisions. He apparently has completely lost whatever mind he had to begin with. This is just ridiculous. Does he really think anyone's going to believe that? I'm here to say, and I'm here to join you and everybody else, the emperor has no clothes on. He's as naked as they come. And unfortunately, I'm pretty sure he got naked with some young people. And that is why he so desperately is trying to kill this whole Epstein thing. And he's just making it worse.
I'm wondering when Donald Trump knew that he was implicated in these Epstein files and what it was that he knew. That's the big question, because he wouldn't have been banging the Epstein drum all this time and then suddenly to pull the rug. That tells me that it was a late decision, that someone came late to Trump to say, you know, you really don't want to be doing that.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now here's the poll this evening. Do you believe Ghislaine Maxwell that Trump is innocent? That'll be the perjurer, Ghislaine Maxwell. Do you believe that her testimony that Donald Trump is innocent in the Epstein affair? It's a simple yes or no required. You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my X, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. And if you're watching us on the YouTube stream, please make sure that you have subscribe to my YouTube channel. Costs nothing at all. Just click it. It will help us with Mr. Algorithm. And you can always give a thumbs up to the show. You can always even tell your friends and followers that you are watching us on live on the YouTube stream now. If you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the British Isles and in Ireland, 08081 965522. And the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Larry Johnson is a veteran of the CIA and the State Department's Office of Counter-Terrorism and a founder of Berg Associates. Larry, it's always a pleasure to have you, even if the subjects are seldom pleasurable. Before we go off touring the world, is there any update you can give us? As a believer myself, I'm deeply stricken by what has happened in Minneapolis today. Is there any update you can give us on that?
It turns out so far it was a transgender shooter. She used the names both Robert Westman and Robin Westman. And it's, the last I was informed was 2 dead, several injured. It just, shooting up children in a church, it's just unconscionable. But, we're watching the same thing go on in Palestine, in Gaza. That, this is just, we look at the grief and the outpouring, correctly so, surrounding this incident. But then the world is largely mute and silent as far worse is happening in Gaza to the Palestinian children. I wish that we would come up with the single standard. Nobody has the right to kill children.
Well, these are children of a lesser God, of course. The scores, if not hundreds of thousands of children who have been murdered and maimed in Gaza, the hundreds of thousands of women who have been murdered and maimed in Gaza, and the hundreds of journalists, TV crews and cameramen that this time, imagine all the times that we didn't catch it on camera. This time, if we were watching Al Jazeera, we literally saw it happen. We saw the first tap kill the medical staff in the Nasser Medical Hospital, and then 15 minutes later we saw the second tap murder the people who had gone to save the lives of those who could be saved in the aftermath of the first attack. It would seem that Israel has gotten away with that crime like it's gotten away with all the others.
Yeah, it is. This can be brought to a quick end, regardless of what the United States does. I accept the fact that the United States is totally, completely compromised, purchased by the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee and other pro-Zionist groups. But the countries of Europe, and the BRICS countries, they need to oppose immediate trade embargo. No more imports, no more exports coming in and out of Israel. Shut them down. Break diplomatic relations. Let them know you're not welcome among the civilized nations of the world as long as you engage in these kinds of atrocities. I think the BRICS nations alone are capable of shutting Israel down, but they won't do it either. The only country we see that still continues to stand up and fight is Yemen with the Houthis. They are relentless. They're the only ones that have not abandoned the people of Palestine to this horrific genocide.
Now, you mentioned the word civilized. That word has set a lot of fluttering in the dovecots of the Arab world, as you know, following the astounding performance at a press conference by your country's plenipotentiary there. First of all, what does any of what's happening in Lebanon have to do with him? He was acting like he was the ruler of Lebanon. And why send such mutts as him and Lindsey Graham into the diplomatic, political minefield that is the Arab Middle East, and particularly in the Levant.
Yeah, well, you and I are old enough to remember the first real foray of the United States into Beirut back in 1982, 83. Did not end well then. This obsession with Hezbollah as, I call that a cartoon terrorist organization as viewed by the West, failing to appreciate that Hezbollah is really a quasi-government organization providing a broad range of social services, medical services. It's not just a military organization. It is there to defend Palestinian people, to fight, to protect the Shia that are there as residents of southern Lebanon. And the words and actions of this fellow Tombarrack are just appalling, because all he's doing is pouring the gasoline on flames of a civil war that had died out a few years back, but the embers are still smoldering. And if this blaze will ignite again. And only this time, Lebanon's very future could be in the hands of fate.
Now, Larry, I broke the news this evening. I say broke it because Trump confirmed that thermonuclear weapons had been transferred to a secret location in Europe. I am breaking the news that secret location is Lakenheath in Surrey, titularly an RAF base, but as you know, an American Air Force base under a false flag. And that's where these bombs now are, placing Britain at the epicenter of any nuclear conflagration which might break out in Europe. Today we discover that the Russians have begun moving some of their nuclear weapons from their bases in the Urals. The proximate reason for all of this is the continuing war in Ukraine, which Trump said he'd halt in 24 hours, then it became a week, and now it's been more than 6 months, and instead of halting it, he has, whether he intended to or not, given it a new lease of life, given it a new spring in its step. If you look at Zelensky, he's now talking like he's on top of the world again. What on earth is going on?
Yeah, I say don't listen to what Donald Trump says. Watch what he does. While I applaud and welcome the willingness of President Putin of Russia to meet with Donald Trump and try to open up channels of communication. It's always better to talk than to fight. Nonetheless, Trump's actions, as exhibited by the deployment of the B-61-12 nuclear bomb, no U.S. nuclear weapons had been stored in the UK or Europe since 2008. So here's Trump talking peace, but by his actions, it wasn't just in Lakenheath, it's also at least in 5 other NATO bases in Europe that those bombs have been deployed. Now, it's true that they're gravity bombs that would require an aircraft to fly into Russia to drop it, which is pretty unlikely. It would be a one-way suicide mission for any pilot that opted to do that. But NATO has continued to take provocative actions such as the deployment of an Aegis missile system that's normally on a U.S. destroyer, but in this case it's now land-based in both Poland and Romania, and it is capable of firing a Tomahawk cruise missile. And a Tomahawk cruise missile is quite capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. So from the standpoint of Russian military planners, they have to assume that all of these moves of deploying nuclear bombs in the NATO countries, having these nuclear capable missile systems in place, having General Christopher Donahue, the head of the United States European Command based in Stuttgart, do a speech in July talking about how quickly that NATO would overwhelm and conquer Kaliningrad, a Russian exclave that's sitting on the Baltic Sea. Then the different attacks that have taken place at Russian oil facilities, the U.S. initiative with Armenia and Azerbaijan, where the United States doesn't have a single strategic interest there, but nonetheless meddling in an attempt to try to put the Caucasus on the southern border of Russia as a threat. When you take all of this together, Donald Trump is not sending messages of peace. He's sending messages of war, and Russia, I think, should prepare accordingly.
The signs are that they are, and as you imply, they would be fools not to, because it has to be assumed by the Russian defense systems that any or all of these provocations could go real. Again, because we're the same age, we remember the 1980s. We remember the Pershing and Cruz sightings. We remember the Able Archer military exercise that the Soviet bloc believed was a cover for a first strike attack on them. And they seriously considered preemptively firing their own nuclear weapons at us. Younger people may not remember that. Other older people like us choose to forget it. But this series of tripwires is filled with terrifying dangers that could portend the end of all of us and our children and their children yet unborn.
Right. Well, in fact, you know, I entered on duty at the Central Intelligence Agency September 15th, 1985. And during the first week I was in a career trainee program. And I remember the very first intelligence classified document I saw, was presented and we were being introduced to it, was about the introduction of the Pershing II missiles into Europe, about the efforts of the Soviets to resist and try to encourage protest against it, justifiably so. So you'd think after 40 years, we would have learned something. And in fact, we find not only are we failing to learn, we're regressing in our intellectual capabilities when it comes to dealing with the proliferation of nuclear weapons. That many today who are younger than you and I continue to entertain the absurd notion that, hey, maybe we could actually fight with tactical nukes and it would turn out okay. Absolutely insanity. You know, I think recognizing this potential contingency is one of the reasons that the Russians worked to develop the Oreshnik missile, which is, if you will, an alternative to using tactical nuclear weapons. It does not bring the radiation. It is able to be actually more precisely targeted and used to really carry out some destruction. And actually, we've seen in the last 2 weeks that the Russians took out 2 missile factories in Ukraine. And then there was a mysterious explosion at a warehouse in Hamburg yesterday, day before yesterday, that I can't rule out that it was not the work of a special operations force by Russia, because what was stored there were propellant systems that were going to be used in missiles that were going to be fired at Russia. So I think the Russians are taking a lot of steps to try to preempt this potential escalation, because they recognize once you start escalating in that way, how do you stop it? And there's always great room for error and mistake in the heat of battle.
Now, in the time we've got left, Larry, if there's going to be, if the balloon's going to go up, my bet is that it's most likely to go up in the Persian Gulf. Now, Iran has unveiled a new super weapon, non-nuclear, but totally devastating and indefensible, according to many military experts. The Russians have evacuated their embassy out of Tel Aviv, and Russia has, as you know, a special relationship with Israel. A quarter of the people in Israel are Russian-speaking people. They know the dangers, probably as well as anybody else, and they've closed their embassy and evacuated all their diplomats. The US abandoned abruptly this week 2 of its military bases in Iraq. All of that sounds to me like there's going to be a blow-up in the Gulf. Israel's not capable of defending itself from the resultant retaliation, and that's where the United States is always expected to come in. What do you think are the dangers of that?
Well, the dangers are counting on the United States to be able to have your back, number one. The United States, despite Trump's bombast and belligerent talk about our great military capabilities, the course of the war, the special military operation in Ukraine, coupled with U.S. naval operations in the Red Sea against the Houthis, coupled with our failed experiment in Afghanistan after 21 years, the United States is actually very limited in its ability to conduct operations. It might be able to do something in a very short period of time, but for sustained operations, it just simply does not have the strategic depth anymore. We noticed that it's been scurrying to re-equip Israel with these THAAD, the Terrain High Altitude Air Defense Systems. They come in at $13 million apiece. But the problem is the United States only makes 50 of those a year. There's not a switch you can throw that actually will turn it on. No matter how many new missile systems we sent to Israel to try to defeat the Iranian missiles, the fact that Iran is firing hypersonic missiles, which doesn't mean that, it means more than just that they travel at speed greater than Mach 6. What distinguishes the hypersonic missile from the traditional ballistic missile is it is steerable. It can maneuver. It can evade air defense systems, which we have seen we've got video evidence of that having happened previously in Israel during the strikes last October. So unlike the 12-day war that started on June 13th, this time Iran is quite prepared for any contingency. They swallowed their pride. They've accepted significant military assistance from Russia, from China. They have rejiggered their decision-making in Defense National Security Council. Ali Larijani is now in charge of that, playing a very leading role, and he is a trusted confidant of the Ayatollah Khamenei. So, I hesitate in saying this, but maybe it would take Israel launching a suicidal attack on Iran, and Iran's retaliation would so cripple Israel that Israel would be forced to put a halt to its genocidal campaign. Let's call that would be the only silver lining in a horrifically dark cloud.
Now, Larry, as always, you're a picture of tropical splendor. That shirt would look great in Venezuela. Would you feel safe going to Venezuela tomorrow, or should we expect an outbreak of hostilities there?
Yeah, that is what the United States is doing there is truly alarming. A great lie is being pushed right now in the American public, the propaganda that Nicolas Maduro is some sort of cartel narco warlord. Nothing could be further from the truth. Now, has the Maduro government benefited from some narcotics proceeds that have handled by Colombian cartels? Absolutely. But I can make the same case for American corporations, for Philip Morris, for R.J. Reynolds, for Canadian liquor companies. I've done extensive investigations in the field, in this particular field. In fact, we did an investigation on behalf of the European Union back in 2003 that led to Philip Morris settling with the European Union for $1.5 billion. Sounds like a lot of money, but that's just a week of cash flow for Philip Morris. But all that money was drug proceeds. So to target Nicolas Maduro, this is a play to go after the oil and gas in Venezuela and to limit Russian and Chinese influence. in Venezuela. This has nothing to do with curbing the flow of narcotics into the United States. The way you curb that, you crack down on U.S. banks, you can't crack down on U.S. corporations that are taking the drug money and facilitating the activity. That's how you defeat it.
Larry Johnson, a tour of the horizon with you is always a delight. Thanks for joining us on the Mother
Thank you, my
of
friend.
All Talk Shows. Let me take a quick break. Your calls coming up next. Stay tuned.
George, I'm just looking at another dimension in this Gaza war conflict. Could this be a religious conflict in the guise of it's not Islam versus Christianity versus Judaism, but an ideology, a Zionist ideology in establishing their leader that is supposed to come in the future, and they will then govern and rule?
It's in their ideology, for sure. The Zionists are no more and no less than a nationalist ideology. They are nothing whatsoever to do with religion. Anybody who thinks Netanyahu is religious hasn't looked too closely into his private life. These people are extreme nationalists, exceptionalists. Some Americans believe in American exceptionalism. Zionists believe in Jewish exceptionalism. Nobody, in truth, is exceptional. There's nothing religious about it. It's about land. It's about nationalist supremacy, ethno-religious supremacy on the land of Palestine. And the Europeans colonized Palestine in the same way that the Europeans colonized South Africa. So fitting, the victims of white European colonialism are coming to the aid of other victims of white European colonialism. And they're doing the whole world a signal service.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
Now, tonight's poll: do you believe Ghislaine Maxwell that Trump is innocent? Yes or no? You can vote on Telegram, on X, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. And 17,000 people have so far cast their vote. And sorry, Donald, but pretty overwhelmingly, people say no. If you want to call us, it's toll free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in Britain and Ireland, 0808 196 5522. And the worldwide number 0044 203 966 2625. Let me take the first call of the evening. It's from Kenneth in Edinburgh in Scotland on Palestine. Kenneth, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Hi, George. Thank you for taking my call. I just want to ask you, why is the world not doing anything about Gaza?
Well, that's the $64,000 question. There are lots of reasons.
Yeah, and what bothers me is if the neighbouring countries round about in the area are doing nothing. You know,
the ones in the area are wholly owned subsidiaries of the Western Empire, were created by the Western Empire. The corrupt kings were placed on the thrones by the Western Empire. The boundaries, borders of these artificial states were literally drawn by Sykes and Picot in a room which I have frequently sat in the House of Commons, in the upper committee room corridor. So their performance is not really a mystery. The mystery is why Western countries, including our own of Scotland and our own of the United Kingdom and other countries in Europe and North America, are madly complicit in all of this. It's not just that they're not doing anything to stop it, they're doing many things to facilitate it. That's the real mystery. Now, if you're a regular viewer, you'll know my theory is that it's cash, compromat, and my third card, that in the Orientalist view of the world, the Israelis are people like us, and the Arabs in Palestine are othered, and the racist mentality that underpins that view of the world is everywhere to be found. I had to tell you Robin Westman's name to try and still the fervour that has been rising in social media in glorious expectation that the murderer of these little children in Minneapolis would turn out to have a Muslim name. Turns out he's a white, Caucasian American, and it would appear, according to Larry Johnson, a transvestite activist. So racism isn't far away in our society, including the society we live in. Ken, over to you.
Fortunately, you're right what you say. Can I just say something, George? I think someone like yourself should be number 10, because then we will get the truth about everything.
Well, it's kind of you to say, Kenneth. It's not going to happen, but maybe my friend Jeremy Corbyn will be in number 10. We'll certainly be doing everything that we can to put him there. It's going to be an epic battle, a trichotomy. It's going to be Starmer, Farage, or Jeremy Corbyn. I know where my hopes would lie in that battle. Thanks for the call. Now, if you want to send comments on YouTube, you can do it by scanning the QR code now on your screen. Patrick Sheringham has. Lakenheath is in Suffolk. Of course it is. I beg your pardon. And Crowhawk says, I once worked at Lakenheath and Mildenhall. I remember that nuclear weapons were stored in igloos near the runway. And Peace Before says, Kiev welcomed Hitler's Third Reich soldiers with cheering crowds, wine and flowers. Yeah, and they'd already begun massacring the Polish and Jewish populations that they found there. And Jolly Lollipop 1 says Trump is guilty of a lot of stuff like genocide, cheating at golf, etc. But I don't think he's a paedophile. And Ixin Man says when dickhead Starmer emerges from his nuclear bunker after World War III, Keith Richards will not be happy to see him. Oh, gallows humour, that one. On the line is a legend. It's May in Oklahoma. On you go, May.
Hey, George, how are you? I hope you're well.
By the grace of God, good, thanks. Yeah, good.
Well, I called today. I want to talk about a couple of things. Mainly, I want to talk about the evolution of George Galloway. I want to thank you so much first for allowing me to talk and for encouraging me. And I also want to wish you a happy birthday. I know it's late, but I realized that this month that you and my dad had the same birthday. So I think that's very interesting.
Oh,
and you once said I was too young to remember something. I forget what it was, but I'm turning 68 in exactly 1 month. So, oh, you were talking about Roy Cohn.
Yeah.
And his effect on Trump, and I remember Roy Cohn. But back to you. I know that when you started out in life, you probably were an outcast. Just a few things that you said. You had a difficult beginning in your life. And because of that, you love you love the outcast and you love the downtrodden. And you have struggled for recognition your whole life and acceptance. And when I first started listening to you, you actually said you were embarrassed to have to ask for money. And I told you at that time that you didn't need to be, because you are worth your salt. Now you have MOATS TV, And I hope you have no shame asking for money to support, because I believe you're finally coming into your own and understanding how very, very important you are to many, many people all over the world, millions, I'm sure. And you also ask not only for their support, for their understanding, and you help motivate us to take action. I know you motivate me. And now you're being recognized all over the world. And not only in your show, but you're being recognized by, in the battle for truth, I like to say, because you're talking to world leaders all over the place, people that I also watch, other people in alternate news. Scott Ritter, your two guests today, I really love and admire. And George, you have come a long way in your life, but you have come a long way just in the last year and a half to 2 years that I've been watching you. And I want you to remember, on those days when you just feel like you don't know how you can do it anymore, because we all feel that way. We see the pictures, we see the videos, we hear the news reports. You know, we Americans hear about shootings, this horrible shooting that's happened today, and we all just despair sometimes. But I want you on those days to remember, number one, how far you've come from your beginnings, and number two, how far you brought other people along with you, because you are bringing other people along with you, and you.
Well, that's the most important thing, May. I have to stop you. You're going to make me cry. But the most important thing is the people I'm bringing with me, because I'm obviously not on my last legs or anything. I'm not going to croak anytime soon, God willing, I don't think. But this is my last few years in active frontline politics. I'm young compared to Jeremy Corbyn and Donald Trump, and I'm even younger than Vladimir Putin and so on, but I'm not young. So the crucial thing now is who I have helped to educate, to agitate, to organize, because these are the three principles of my life's work. Educate, agitate, organize. And I've tried to do that always, and judging by the enemies I have amassed, I haven't been entirely unsuccessful in doing that. Because my 90-year-old mother is definitely watching, I have to make clear that I had an extremely happy childhood. It was a very poor one, but it was extremely happy. No one could have come from a better family than me. But I have always struggled for, as you put it, recognition and acceptance. I don't want acceptance into certain councils, but I do want the acceptance of the political approach, methodology, and views that I hold. I want respect for those, for I believe in them, and therefore I believe they are a necessity for the saving, for the future of mankind. I've certainly come a long way. My arse used to hang out of my trousers. I used to have holes in the soles of my shoes. On Thursday nights before my father came home with his pay in a brown envelope, handed it over to my mother, and got pocket money back for his cigarettes on a Thursday night. Dinner for me was bread that wasn't exactly fresh, with margarine that definitely wasn't butter, and some HP sauce, brown sauce or tomato sauce on it. That was dinner for me on a Thursday night. So in terms of my life and the life that I'm able, by the grace of God, to afford my 6 children, I have come a long way. And I'm now planning for my political succession if you like, for who will come into my shoes, both in broadcasting, but more urgently on the political front. But I hear what you say. I'm deeply grateful for it. And I'll tell you a funny anecdote that happened just this afternoon. My good wife was at the nail salon, and I was going to pick her up. She has to get this Palestine flag nail done, and only specialist people can do it. And the young woman who did it today was herself wearing a Palestine badge. It's quite common in Scotland, thank God. And when I was on my way to pick up my wife, a couple came towards me. A couple about my age, a bit younger, probably, maybe your age, May. And the wife said to the husband, "That's George." And I took a glance to see if I knew them, because she was using my first name. And she then said, "He looks a lot different in real life." I didn't have the courage to ask. In a good way or in a bad way? May, thanks very much for a very beautiful call. Now, you've been extremely generous this week with your donations. And here's tonight's Wall of Fame. James Preston, Motaz Salah, Hussein and Nina, John Cullen, and Chinid Beg. Thank you very much indeed to all of you. And as May just said, it's not in my nature to be asking repeatedly for money, and I'm not asking for it for myself, for I get no pay here at all, none at all. I'm asking for the show, particularly for the Wednesday night show, because we can sustain a weekly Mother of All Talk shows, but we can only sustain a twice weekly Mother of All Talk shows if you support us. And the best way to do that is through moats.tv on the website. Or you can support me and our work, therefore, on patreon.com/George Galloway. And I hope you think it's worth doing that. Sarkar is another legend in Glasgow, but on Ukraine. Sarkar, welcome.
Angry when he speaks to George.
Well,
I'll explain that when you hear about Starmer and Zelensky, you'll know why he's angry. So we can have that conversation with her one day. Now, coming to a very serious question, George. First of all, people like yourself, Scott Ritter, Richard Midhurst, and many more deserve a pat on your back, because not only do you give the most accurate information in real time, you predict what will happen much more earlier. Right from 2001, I've been following you, George, from when you predicted what will happen. And believe me, George, you guys have said well before in advance that this guy called Zelensky, he does not want an end to the war in Russia. He wants prolonging the war with Russia because that's in his vested interests. What this guy has done, and this literally proves the hypocrisy of the so-called European Union, he has attacked a pipeline 3-4 days ago of Hungary. Why? Because they were getting oil from Russia. Help me solve this riddle, George, because maybe I am stupid. I don't understand this. Hungary is a member of the European Union, correct? They are. I know some of the European Union heads are some of those 7 dwarves who went to meet Donald Trump in the White House, supposedly to bring a peace deal. If a European Union country is attacked by a non-European Union member who was not made a European Union member because of the corruption, and God knows if they'll ever be made, what kind of a nonsense is this? Everyone is sanguine as if nothing happened. Where is all the so-called unity of the EU? And this man has attacked a country who has nothing to do with the Russia versus Ukraine war. Why this hypocrisy, George? Where are the so-called leaders of the EU?
Well,
and where are our leaders?
I'll tell you, but you already know. But what is important is that the audience must know. And the audience must multiply their number of people who know. First of all, this oil is coming through a pipeline in Ukraine for which Russia pays Ukraine for the transit of this oil and gas. So it's all hypocrisy, all these sanctions. Ukraine itself is at war with Russia but being paid by Russia for the safe transit of Russian energy across its territory. Hungary is being supplied through the extension of that pipeline, like all the other European Union countries and the United States of America. All of them are buying Russian energy, whilst threatening countries like India with gazillions of tariffs for doing exactly what they are doing. Lukoil, the Russian petrol station, has a chain of petrol stations operating across the United States of America. How's that for hypocrisy? Now, this attack on Hungary, it's not that it's in the European Union, because we have no collective security pact in the European Union. It's a member of NATO. A NATO country, Hungary, was attacked by a non-NATO country, Ukraine, which bombed its pipeline as they had earlier bombed the German state's Nord Stream pipeline, and nobody not only did anything about it, nobody said anything about it. Nobody dare say anything about it. If I was Hungary, I would take drastic action in retaliation for this offense of terrorism, of energy terrorism, and of the simple, old-fashioned breach of my territorial integrity. How dare you blow up our pipeline on our territory? You'll have to pay for that one way or another. Sarkar, thanks for that great call. I've got to take a quick break, but coming up right after the break is the one and only Colonel Douglas Macgregor, and you definitely don't want to miss him. Stay tuned. A big thanks to the people who support me on the Patreon page. I really have come to depend on the income from that. It costs £1 a week, not even the price of a cup of coffee in an insalubrious cafe. If you think you could stretch to that, please support me on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. Now, the MOATS team have added a tiered system on my Patreon page where you can become an official MOATS graduate. How about that? I speak as someone who graduated from nowhere, from the factory floor in Michelin. But you can become a MOATS graduate and legend. You can give a regular donation to support the show and my work. You can now upgrade from a mere Patreon to a MOATS graduate at £10 a month, as opposed to £5 a month, I think it is. And you can receive official MOATS legend status for £20.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Do you believe Ghislaine Maxwell? I could end the sentence there, you know. Do you believe, Ghislaine Maxwell, that Trump is innocent? Yes or no? Get voting. You've got about 30 minutes or so still left to vote, and it's not going well for Donald Trump. Colonel Douglas Macgregor is the oracle. There is nothing about military and political military affairs that he is not a master of. He's a retired US Army colonel. He's an author and a defense and foreign policy consultant, and an all-round good guy, as a fellow Scotsman usually is. Colonel Macgregor, thanks for joining us. We've got a lot of wars to cover, so let me press on immediately. I'm very worried indeed about the Persian Gulf. The Russians have evacuated their embassy in Tel Aviv, and the Americans have abandoned two of their most vulnerable military bases in Iraq. very peremptorily indeed. And Russia kind of knows from both sides what's going on. They have a relationship with Israel, and they have a very close relationship now with Iran. They seem to think, and the American government seems to think, that the balloon might be about to go up there again. Do you think so?
I've been expecting something in September, latest October, because the Greater Israel Project has no chance of success. And I think Mr. Netanyahu knows this, unless they can ultimately balkanize and destroy Iran. So the war has to continue. There's no question about that if you're an Israeli. On the other hand, I'm not sure exactly when. I know that a lot of materiel, theater high altitude air defense missiles and equipment are being shipped to Israel. So I know we're busy trying to assist the Israelis with regard to defending themselves. And of course, they have limitless ammunition from us and whatever else they need. I know the Russians have been on the ground in Iran trying to repair, restore, and ultimately improve their integrated air defenses. So a war is inevitable in terms of, happening again. We just don't know exactly when. And these evacuations from Iraq are interesting, because I remember when President Trump was president the first time around in 2020, when I was working for him, he was very interested in getting us completely out of Syria and Iraq. And of course, he was obstructed at that point. So for this to happen suggests that something is indeed building, but none of us knows when or how it will happen.
Well, turning then to the war that we know all too much about and that is still raging, it's a commonplace to state that Donald Trump hasn't ended the Ukraine war in 24 hours or 24 weeks. He is, in a sense, whilst not financially, he says, doubled down on the war. He has empowered the 7 dwarves of the European Union, as long as they buy the weapons from him. He's quite happy for the European Union to supply limitless weapons, limited only by questions of industrial capacity, but to empty their armories, give everything to Ukraine, and for that weaponry to include the potential to penetrate deep into the Russian heartland. I'm thinking of the new cruise missile allocation, which Trump announced, which I think it was 2,000 or 3,000 units will go to Ukraine. These are well capable of penetrating into Russian territory deeply. So what is it? Was Trump lying when he said he wanted to end the war in Ukraine? Or was he telling the truth but is simply unable to do so? And if it's the latter, why?
I think the second answer that you provide is accurate. And I think that's what he finally concluded after he met in Alaska with President Putin. I don't think President Trump, who is certainly not a student of European history, culture, economics, geography, ever really understood the complexity of the issues in Ukraine. I don't think he completely grasped what he was dealing with. Whether or not he does now is open to question, but he certainly did not until he got to Alaska. I think you're raising a very important question. If you're sitting in Moscow and you're looking at events, you're saying, well, first of all, we had a good meeting with President Trump and his team. Remember, they met previously in Saudi Arabia, and on both occasions, both teams said they'd made some progress in the direction of normalizing relations with Russia, and that's something that President Trump has said he wanted to do. However, having done that, of course, did not address Ukraine. And I think he decided that, I can't fix Ukraine. I can't solve this, which is something he should have understood from the beginning. I think he does understand that. On the other hand, I think he's being advised by people who are telling him, well, you can't just walk away. And remember, that was what I urged from the beginning, very early on to President Trump was, look, let's leave this. Announce you're suspending all further armaments, we'll send humanitarian assistance to the Ukrainians, but the best way to end this war is to stop the flow of cash and weapons to Ukraine. At that point, the war has to stop because the Ukrainians really are at the end of their tether as it is. And the Russians will then begin to take us seriously. I think he's been urged by everybody on the Hill and elsewhere not to do that. In other words, he's turned out to be like too many politicians, George. He wants to be a little bit pregnant. So he's straddling the proverbial fence. Now, this latest announcement is horrific. The notion that we would send thousands of cruise missiles over there is insane to begin with. Secondly, it's not going to happen very quickly because we can't build that many in the time that remains for Ukraine. So I think the Russians are looking at this and saying, we don't have any choice anymore. We've got to end this war. So we're going to press ahead. Now, what does press ahead mean? Well, they've already got special operations forces on the outskirts of Odessa. They've already destroyed all potential military targets in and around Odessa. They're going to move towards Zaporizhzhia. They're going to get complete control of Kherson, all of the areas in southern Ukraine. There's no choice in that matter. And eventually, I think we'll see them occupy Odessa. I've always felt that way. They've said that for the last 3 years. And you'll remember that Russians were herded into buildings in Odessa and then burned alive by the Ukrainians down there. That's something the Russians have never forgotten, and I would not forget that either. So I think those things are on the table. The question is, do you cross the river in strength and go north to Kiev? In other words, you eliminate the cancer, because they don't want to refight this war in the future. And now it seems that MI6 in London is very interested in pushing this man Zaluzhny, who is ostensibly their puppet. That's not going to fly with Moscow. They will not accept that under any circumstances. And then finally, at least President Trump has now said, as I understand it, there will be no U.S. forces on the ground in Ukraine. Now, we've had this confusion over the last several days. Well, we may do this, we may not. I'm hearing he says no. The president of Poland, who is very much an important actor in all of this, has said no Polish troops on the ground in Ukraine. And as I've said from the very beginning, you didn't have Poland at this summit in the White House. Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, they border Ukraine. They are key to the outcome. They've been treated as though they're second-class citizens, irrelevant. They have to be on board for whatever happens in Ukraine. So I think that summit in the White House was a serious mistake. You called them the seven dwarves. The people that came in there were a disaster because they have nothing at stake. What they say is irresponsible. Starmer talking about what? 30,000 British troops? Good luck. The British Army, as you and I both know, is a shadow of its former self. It's in bad shape. It's really tragic. The same thing is true in France. As a friend of mine in the French army says, the only thing we're prepared to do is go on safari in Africa. So there's 60,000 troops. And then I listened to a British analyst who came on, and I've forgotten his name, but he explained that you would have to have at least 300,000 troops that would operate effectively along the border of Ukraine to guarantee anything. And then finally, the Russians have said, if you move any troops in there from Western Europe, that's a red line for us. You make yourselves a co-belligerent, we'll attack you. So where are we? I think we're where we thought we would always be for months. And every time I've talked to you, this has come up, really. Who is going to determine the outcome? Russia. How will it be determined? On the ground in Ukraine. End of discussion. And in the meantime, NATO is falling apart. Anybody who thinks that's robust and capable is crazy. The same thing is true for the EU. If you live in Hungary and Slovakia and Poland, you're being told you need to accept 1 million people from Africa, the Middle East, and Southwest Asia. These people have said, no, thank you. We're not interested in that. We see what's happened in Great Britain. We've seen what's happened in Germany and Italy and France. We don't want that here. Everything is falling apart in the West. Nothing is working. So in the final analysis, Russia is winning this war, and it will determine the outcome. We won't.
Now, the Ukrainian authorities themselves, we learned from leaked documents this week, indicate that they have lost 1.7 million men These are First World War levels of casualty. That's not just killed in action, it's also missing in action, but a very significant number of those are almost certainly dead and being concealed as being dead because it saves Zelensky paying out death benefit to their widows and families. 1.7 million Ukrainians missing in action or killed in action, plus 250,000 deserters, plus 9 million Ukrainians living outside in our countries at our expense, and not very well received, frankly, in most polite society. I saw some of them in Canada, I think it was, complaining about the miserly $2,000 a month that they were being given by the Canadian taxpayer. They are going to remain in those countries. Ukraine is effectively a failed state now, isn't it?
I think the nation of Ukraine, if we want to call it that, is in ruins, thanks to this man Zelensky and his backers in Washington and London primarily. Now, if you look at Poland right now, the Polish president, in addition to saying we're not going to send any more troops to Ukraine, they sent several thousand over there. They lost at least 2,000 killed trying to help the Ukrainians. They've said no more, out of the question. They've got several million Ukrainians in Poland. 1 out of 5 of them is applying for citizenship in Poland. So the Poles are now struggling with this because Poland is not that large a country. They've already got 40 plus million. They would like most of these Ukrainians to go home. And you're right, in Austria, where they have a lot of them, people are on the streets saying, stop importing, start deporting. Now, they're not just talking about unwanted Ukrainians, they're talking about large numbers of people from overseas that are non-Europeans. But your point is absolutely valid. This is a disaster. Now, I said a couple of weeks ago when I was asked 1.8 million had been killed and I was viciously attacked. Now they're saying 1.7. It's actually over 1.7. My sources are Polish, Ukrainian, and Russian. And what they try to do is the following. They try to read all the obituaries, actually visit the cemeteries, visit the hospitals, and more important, some of them have had the opportunity through commercial satellite coverage to find the mass graves. You were talking about people being killed and not reported. There are mass graves in eastern Ukraine of Ukrainian soldiers. Literally thousands in these graves, essentially bulldozed into the dirt and forgotten because the regime doesn't want to do what you described. And remember, you have so much corruption inside this military. If you want to be evacuated from the battlefield, you have to pay somebody in an ambulance to drive you to a hospital. What kind of an evacuation system is that for a military establishment? Ukraine is destroyed. It's finished. If President Trump really understood any of this, he would do what I said to begin with. Simply suspend the aid, say this regime is not legitimate, it's over. But he refuses to do that. You know, we have a similar situation, as you're well aware, in the Middle East. I think if President Trump really understood the reality on the ground in Gaza, he would stop supplying the Israelis. But he can't do that. He refuses to do that. We are prisoners of all sorts of forces right now in the United States, none of which are in our interest. Some of these are big donors. Some of these are political, industrial, but they're all bad. So the only conclusion I think most Americans can reach is we're not represented in Washington. Our government is divorced from us. I think you and many of your fellow citizens are reaching a similar conclusion.
For sure. Now, earlier I interviewed your friend and mine, Larry Johnson. He was, as always, in tropical splendor. I wondered if he was on his way to Venezuela. And I asked him if he'd feel safe going to Venezuela. Is Trump really going? We talked about the 7 dwarfs. He's got 7 warships off the coast of Venezuela and 4,000 Marines. What are they doing, Colonel?
Well, there are 7 warships. I don't know if there are 4,000 Marines. I was told there are 4,000 Marines and sailors. That's not exactly an invasion force. But I must tell you that I see a tremendous amount of resemblance between Maduro and Saddam Hussein. If you put them side by side, they begin to look a lot alike. And we're seeing the same playbook applied. Demonize Maduro the way we demonize Saddam Hussein. You know, even though privately you can find a lot of people that will say, damn, we should have left Saddam Hussein in charge in Iraq. We were better off then than we are now. That may be true, but the problem with Maduro is very simply, he has a very large country. This place is the size of France and Germany combined. Only got 26 million people, but millions live on the coast in those big cities. However, and this should not be overlooked, it's probably third in the world, maybe second now, I don't know, in terms of reserves of oil and gas. But they have very, very expensive, let's say, luxurious emerald mines and gold mines as well in Venezuela. So I suppose if you look at all of that against the backdrop of what we're discussing with another Saddam Hussein episode, it's not impossible that we could be headed there.
Well, of course, Saddam fell because Russia was on the floor, drunk, having its pocket picked. Putin hadn't picked the country up and dusted it down then in 2003. In 2025, Venezuela has extensive relations, both with Russia and with China, just signed a massive oil deal with China, and of course has a close relationship with Iran. And so it's all very circular, this. It's the same countries, it's the same actors being threatened by the same people. It's almost like war throughout the world, isn't it?
Well, to some extent, you have to admit that what's good for the goose is good for the gander. In other words, we've done these things to the Russians in countries that border them. We've been up to all sorts of malevolent activity in Central Asia, in places like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, as well as obviously Ukraine, also now in Azerbaijan, which we see as helping Israel on the one hand, encircle and potentially harm Iran, but on the other side of that coin, Azerbaijan helps us break off Iran from Russia and the One Belt, One Road program, the infrastructure project that provides for rail transportation all the way to and from Iran from Shanghai. So there are a lot of things going on. So it makes sense that you would move into the Caribbean, into our soft underbelly. I keep watching Mexico very carefully because Mexico has always sided with whomever was against us. And I'd be very surprised if we don't see similar mischief down in Mexico. We ought to wake up and recognize the futility of what we've done in the Eastern Hemisphere and come to some sort of arrangement with both China and Russia in the Western Hemisphere. Having said that, though, I don't think the Russians or the Chinese are as foolish as we are. From the very beginning, it should have been obvious to anyone with half a brain that we could not fight and win any conflict against Russia on Russia's doorstep. That's just stupid. Strategically, it's an impossibility. We could not have defeated Germany if we had not had allies in the East as well as in the West to attack Germany during World War II. It would have been impossible. The Germans would have defeated us if we had only had the British as allies and attacked from the West. So the point is, I think Mr. Putin is going to be limited in what he's willing to invest in mischief in the Caribbean directed at us. And I think the same thing is true for the Chinese. So they will give Maduro help, but they're not going to do for him what we've done for Zelensky, which is essentially unconditional support and unlimited funds. That's not going to happen. Nevertheless, it can do us a lot of damage, obviously. But right now, beware of something. 2 Russian bombers landed in Venezuela, and it was treated in Washington as though this was the beginning of a new world war. Well, that's absurd. First of all, neither of them were armed. Okay, let's be realistic. There's nothing happening down there that is so terrible that it threatens our long-term national security. The issue for us is drugs and the drug trafficking and the human trafficking. You don't have to invade Venezuela to stop that. That can be done in other ways. So hopefully someone will wise up and recognize that. We just need to defend our borders. We haven't done that, George, and it's stupid.
Is he a well man, Colonel? Donald Trump, is he a well man?
You know, I'm not a physician, and I can't evaluate. I just think that sometimes he's coherent and sometimes he's not. And I think that he's in a position where he operates on the basis of instinct and impulse. There is no long-term strategic goal in mind. That's the problem. There's no coherent national strategy, whether it's industrial, economic, military, political. I see no long-term strategy. There was none under Biden. This is not a new phenomenon in the history of my country. The United States emerged from World War II suddenly with a lot of money, very wealthy, very powerful, lots of capability, and decided the world was its oyster. And we started meddling everywhere. Well, we're running out of money, running out of resources. We're running out of political credibility and legitimacy at home as well as abroad. It can't go on much longer. But my point is that when you have no strategy, any road takes you where you think you want to go. And so you've got a lot of people standing around President Trump, oh, forget Ukraine. That's a waste of time and money. Just do what you need to mollify Congress. Let's go after the real enemy in Venezuela. I'm sure that discussion's being heard in the Oval Office.
Another masterpiece from Macgregor. Thank you very much, Colonel Douglas Macgregor, retired U.S. Army Colonel, author and defense and foreign policy consultant. Let me take a quick break, then it's your calls all the way up to Gayatri's social media news roundup. Stay tuned. Thank you. Go ahead.
During your show in the past, you've often mentioned that Donald Trump would be a much better alternative than Biden, although you weren't a big fan of him, etc. And you said that in all likeliness, if he gets in power, he'll be much more appeasing towards Putin. There'll be less likely of the conflict to escalate. But I have to tell you, I'm not so sure about that. Really, I think the only way to solve all this, it doesn't matter if Kenny gets in or anyone else, because there's always going to be, at one stage of our lifetime, two psychotic leaders of the superpowers. Why hasn't anyone in your show or yourself mentioned anything about nuclear disarmament or CND? Surely the only way to save humanity is by nuclear disarmament. And I just wanted to see what you thought about that.
Yeah, well, of course, but how are you going to get that? I mean, does CND even still exist? They could have been leafleting outside every cinema showing Oppenheimer. But of course, they don't have enough people to fill a telephone box. It is the worst example I know of, although the Stop the War Coalition runs it close, of an organization that for its sectarian, internal, political reasons has thrown away its brand. I have not appeared on a Stop the War platform for an entire decade. Not to worry, no to NATO, no to war. Its rival organization attracts exponentially larger numbers of people. They cannot help themselves, these people. These members of leftist groupuscles have it in their DNA that they cannot get along with anybody who isn't exactly like them. And as the number of people who are exactly like them is mercifully tiny, they end up in tiny organizations. So, of course, I'm in favor of the destruction of nuclear weapons. But how are you going to get that? It's a totally utopian slogan to advance at this point in time. I'm just trying to stop the weapons from being used.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Poll question, do you believe Ghislaine Maxwell that Trump is innocent? I think he's guilty of everything myself. Yes or no? You can vote on Telegram, on X, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. Let's go to Canada, Quebec, where Yasser wants to talk about Canada and Ukraine, about which I was opining earlier. Yasser, welcome.
Bonjour, Mr. Galloway. Thank you for taking my call. I heard your monologue. You referenced Canada, Ukraine, and the furtive transport of Nazis from Ukraine to Canada. I wanted to highlight some facts and stats and get your viewpoints and thoughts on it. As soon as the war started in February 2022, Canada rolled out a program called Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel, CUAET, Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel, under which 300,000 Ukrainians have been repatriated to Canada. Red carpet welcome, stipends, allowances, work authorizations leading to residency, 300,000. Compare and contrast, 8,000 people have been brought in from Israel, and only 1,000 barely have been allowed in from Gaza or from Palestine. Only 1,000, and that too after nationwide protests outside the offices of Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada, the ministry, the federal ministry in charge. So if anyone has any doubt about Canada being a country deeply rooted and seated in white supremacy or Western supremacy or hegemony or cognitive dissonance, it's not a land of sorry and thank you as they sell themselves under false advertising across the world. And also another fact and stat that I want to highlight is Canada has given $22 billion US to Ukraine. $22 billion. And Carney, the Goldman Sachs and deep establishment representative, Mark Carney, who's been anointed prime minister, recently went on an unannounced trip to Ukraine and promised $5 billion more. Canada hasn't even given peanuts to Palestinians suffering under unbelievable misery at this point, undergoing genocide and Holocaust. And the person who's been talking about it the most, and whom I'd like to take the liberty to recommend to your producers to invite, is Eve Engler, who's generally is referred to as the Noam Chomsky of Canada. He's also running FYI for the leadership of NDP, the New Democratic Party, the party that you're very familiar with. So I think I just wanted to get your expert opinion on Canada and Ukraine, compare and contrast to Canada and Palestine or Canada and other theaters of war.
Extremely knowledgeable, eloquent, as always, Yasser, and we'll definitely take you up on that suggestion. Let me plug the podcast. We are #1 for politics in Gambia, Iraq, Kuwait, and Oman. How about that for a spread? We're in the top 10 in Pakistan, Nigeria, Peru, Qatar, Serbia, and Guatemala. You can download the MOATS podcast. That's the quintessential MOATS, shorn of all bells and whistles that you don't need, by scanning the QR code on your screen now. You can also listen, of course, on the aforementioned moats.tv website. When you're there making the donation I'm sure you're going to make. Let me get as many calls in as I can. Terence in England, in Reading, on the Zionist setup. Go ahead, Tel.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. I hope you and yours are well. A good friend of mine is an academic, a very strong academic, and we've had our differences over the years and always healthy. We're still very good friends. And he said something 2 or 3 years ago to me, and the more I ponder it, the more obvious it becomes. Everybody's talking about Ghislaine Maxwell, the paedophile's pimp, in jail. Nobody mentions, they all say she's got books and papers everywhere. Nobody ever mentions the Maxwell family. Brothers, Zionists. The whole family are steeped in the whole Zionist issue. Yet the press, I've never ever, other than my sister's a wonderful person, she really wouldn't harm anyone, the usual guff, but nobody has ever looked at them and said, no, far more. that they're letting on. Friedland in The Guardian will never touch it. I look at French media, they never touch it. None of the Five Lies, so-called securitocrats, ever touched those boys. Remember now, they go after Trump's kids, 100 miles an hour. This is a big one. I feel, and I'm starting to come around with my friend's opinion, that all the information is with Mossad in Israel, and those two boys have also got an insurance policy in somewhere that they've hidden. The sister isn't banged off. Mr. Galloway.
Well, I'm deeply familiar with the Maxwell family for all kinds of reasons. I'm still driving a rather nice vintage car that Robert Maxwell had to pay me in libel damages when his defense disappeared in the drink of the Atlantic when he fell or was pushed off his boat. You may recall that in the House of Commons, under parliamentary privilege, I levelled serious allegations against Robert Maxwell and Israel and the whistleblower Mordechai Vanunu and many other things against Maxwell. And he ordered his hirelings in his then 7 different newspapers to launch a jihad against me. And they immediately complied, and the front page of all 7 of them contained completely defamatory, libelous attacks on me for my attack on Maxwell in the House. And I immediately sued and was ready to go all the way on pain of bankruptcy to sue him, because I knew in the process of discovery and in the box I would be able to peel him like an onion. But he never got to court. He fell or was pushed off the boat. I think he was pushed myself. And then his great hulk was transported to the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem and buried there with full Israeli state honors. Every leading politician in Israel who was still alive was there, and 5 surviving heads of Israeli intelligence was present at the funeral. And Yitzhak Shamir, the former terrorist turned Israeli prime minister, said what Israel owes Robert Maxwell, it will never be able to say. And that was as powerful an indication, the whole thing, that Maxwell had contributed signal service to the Zionist state, about which I was in no doubt, am in no doubt, and I have no doubt that Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein were put together by Robert Maxwell for the nefarious purpose of trafficking young people. People get het up, understandably. As a father myself, I do, about the trafficking of underage girls. But equally despicable was the industrial level of trafficking of older, poor girls who were sexually exploited. Their poverty was exploited by the Epstein-Maxwell duo, this Burke and Hare, and these girls were ruthlessly exploited. I saw one of them say she was raped 3 times a day by Epstein and by his associates, who included, as we now know from court, it wasn't a hoax, it wasn't the Democratic Party getting it up, it was in court we learned that those associates included some of the richest and most powerful men in America, and indeed farther afield. Terence, thanks for that. Some comments. JS says, well, I believe Maxwell, a convicted child predator. Indeed. Dejuma Boutique says, Ghislaine Maxwell is trying to stay alive. Indeed, she might. And Emmett Jones says, every time the US overthrows a government, it eventually has to put boots on the ground in some way. And J. Thomas 2728 says, I agree with George 99% of the time. But please don't single out Ukraine for corruption when Russia is the mother of all corruption. And Ahmed Aliaga says, George is an honest-to-goodness political activist. Piers Morgan is an instigator who does it to make money. The Big Amish is on the line from Washington, D.C. on Trump and Maxwell. Welcome back. What would you like to say?
Good evening, George. Thank you for having me. In answering the statement, do I believe Ghislaine Maxwell believes that, or statement that Trump is innocent? Well, I think we have to break that up. Do I believe that Donald Trump had any type of activities with minors? I don't believe that. That's me, but I don't believe that. However, if you're asking me, did anything else transpire there? I'm 50-50 on that one. And it's like, is a fox a vegetarian when he goes to a hen house? I don't think so. So there is some smoke there. So I don't know how to answer that other question. But as far as minors are concerned, I believe totally that if that's part of the question, that Donald Trump has not had any type of situation arise with minors. So that's how I would look at it. What about?
Well, the thing is, neither you nor I can know that, but the FBI knows it, and their investigators know it, and the videos they took, the hard drives they took, the CDs, DVDs that they took from the townhouse in Manhattan, they know it, and we would know it if they would release this material into the public domain, as they promised to do. Indeed, campaigned in an election that they would do. And so my common sense inference is, if you promised that you would release the lists, the files, the videos, and then you don't do it, that's because you've got something to hide. What say you, Amish?
Well, it could be that, but it also could be, we know the protective blanket that they always put, and that is national security. You pointed out that the Maxwell family was deep entrenched into intelligence. Don't forget that Epstein got his first position at a high school in New York by Bill Barr's father, apologize. And Bill Barr, being the Attorney General appointed by Donald Trump, who was no friend of his at different times, but it raises a question. You're absolutely right. Is the intelligence community directing this? And you're right. What is it that they don't want to expose? Are we ever going to see the light of day? I don't know how to answer it. All I know is the history has shown that we'll never know the full details. They might release a bit here or there.
Well,
but
maybe not. Maybe not. As to your fox in the hen house point, I think it's common ground that Donald Trump has been a lifelong adulterer, fornicator, all-round party sort of guy. And Epstein had a bevy of young women that he was retaining for money and transporting from all parts of the country to Manhattan, to Florida, and to Epstein Island. And we're asked to believe that this lifelong adulterer, fornicator, Donald Trump, went into these places where the bevy of young women at his beck and call, paid for by Epstein, and did not partake of any of that. If you believe that, I've got a bridge here in London that I could sell you, going very, very cheap. Thank you, Big Amish in Washington, D.C. Here are tonight's top donors on the Wall of Fame. I'm deeply grateful to them. Isabella McCardle, Patricia McCaffrey, Michael Weinberg, Deborah Burke, and James Brogan. Thank you, all of you, and thanks to everyone who's going to leave anything tonight to pay for this show. Well, even if it's only £1, €1, or $1. Let's go to Shujat in London on Iran, Israel. Shujat, welcome. What do you want to say?
Oh, hello. Good evening, George. How are you? I haven't spoken for a long time to you. Just as I watch
By
your
the grace of God, I'm great.
I watch your shows every Wednesday and Sunday, and I'll soon be donating something for you, definitely. I think you deserve it. But just tell me this, why isn't Iran attacking Israel right now after all these things, and every hour, every minute that passes through, there are more killings, more deaths, more buildings being destroyed. So how long will it keep on delaying it? I mean, Iran is the only country that can do something to discipline Israel. No other Arab country has the guts. They're just flunkies. So we would not expect Iran to sit back and say, we've got this weapon, we've got that weapon, we've developed a big weapon, that's fine. Very impressive, but are they for exhibition or are they for use? So why is Iran attacking? What's the delay? What's holding them? They should do that like pretty soon and stop this nonsense.
I raised this on Sunday with Scott Ritter, and he agreed with me that Iran has the legal right to preemptively defend itself from clear, repeated, daily threats that Israel is going to attack her. Given that Israel did attack her with devastating impact on the personnel of the state and of its scientific and academic apparatus, on its national television station, murdering makeup ladies and tea ladies and presenters and reporters, Iran has an overwhelming legal right to preemptively defend itself from threatened second, subsequent Israeli attack. Indeed, it's not second. Israel has been attacking Iran constantly for decades, murdering, assassinating its scientists, setting off explosions, bombs, sabotage, spying networks, numbered in the thousands of people. The case that Iran has for preemptive self-defense, which is a legally constituted defense, I think is overwhelming. And I'm not running Iran. I don't speak for Iran. I don't even speak to Iran anymore. If I were running Iran, first of all, I'd already have a nuclear weapon, and I'd already be putting Israel in a box from which it would not escape. Thanks, Shujat. Now, there's a No to NATO promo to read out here. It's a unique thing, you know. I think it's completely unique. The Workers' Party of Britain has a veterans section. We have so many ex-military members. We have a section of armed forces veterans within our party, and they're having a round table. And all of these speakers are ex-service personnel. Liam Lafferty, Mick Stott, Warren Thornton, and Andrew Hudd, who's my deputy leader in the party. There's Andrew there, former naval personnel. So if you are interested in veterans issues, if you are interested in military issues, this Veterans Roundtable is the one to watch. 9 p.m. British time on my YouTube, my Rumble, and my X, and on my Facebook. I'm joined by the one and only, my co-star, my good wife, Gayatri, for the social media news roundup. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Let's start with Palestine, because you spoke earlier about the support for Palestine in Scotland. Well, Alison Kiro says Dundee, Scotland always has Palestinian flag flying thanks to George, who twinned the city with Nablus in Palestine. Now remind us which year?
45 years ago. And I've still got the scars. It was a very hard-fought battle. But we twinned Dundee with Nablus in 1980. And we have been flying on the town hall of Dundee, the Palestinian flag, ever since. It's one of my proudest achievements.
And some say it all started on October 7. Some say it is all down to Hamas, whereas Asal Rad on Twitter reminds us that if you were to believe that, then Hamas is all of the following: hospitals, schools, aid workers, journalists, doctors, the United Nations, the ICC, South Africa, the Pope, the IPC, Amnesty International, American students, Doctors Without Borders, all the buildings in Gaza, all Hamas. But you
and
were
cameras. Now they were targeting a Hamas camera. And this is reported by mainstream broadcasters with a straight face. You killed 20 people in a hospital because you thought you located a Hamas camera.
If you were to go to a funeral a day for every child that was killed in Gaza, you would go to a funeral every day for 52 years. Now, this stat is, of course, and counting, so I'm really scared to find out the actual number of years.
We don't know yet anything like the numbers. The numbers are now lost count of. Because if you've been under the rubble, not to put too fine a point on it, you are so now decomposed that how can you be identified? How can you be counted?
I have an email here saying, "Dear George Galloway, my 68-year-old Palestinian mother wants to ask you the following question. I want to understand the grave issue facing the children and people of Gaza. Will the situation remain silent, or is there a near-term solution for the children who suffer every day? This is unimaginable. I would deeply appreciate your thoughts and guidance on what steps can be taken to address this humanitarian crisis. Kind regards from Amal, Ahmed's mother."
Well, my regards back to them, and I'm going to have to be implicitly critical of others. You know, calling for sanctions, calling for an end to weapons sales, this is the kind of softball politics that is now 20 years too late. We need now a military intervention in Gaza. We need now what Larry Johnson was talking about. We need a complete embargo on Israel. Nothing in, nothing out. We need de-recognition of Israel. We need every Israeli ambassador to be sent back. We need every Western ambassador in Israel to be recalled. We need to move on to an emergency footing. I'm all for BDS. We practice it in our own life. We brought up our own children to know what needs to be boycotted. But it's not enough. And it's not quick enough. No. The BRICS countries, the superpowers, Russia and China, I'm forgetting the Arabs for the reasons I outlined on Sunday. I can't bear to think about the Arab rulers and their states and the huge armies that they maintain for the suppression of their own people, not for any good purpose. So, is there any hope? Well, it depends on whether we get those things or not. If we don't get those things, then, as you implied there, 45 years ago, I twinned Dundee with Nablus. Why? Because the Nablus mayor had his legs blown off and he came with tin legs to walk in our streets with this flag to present it to us. 10 legs, 45 years ago, a victim of Israeli terrorism. And guess what? In 1980, Hamas didn't even exist.
Of course not.
So October 7, Hamas, tell that to the Marines.
And then 44 years after you raised the flag in Dundee, we raised the Palestinian flag in your town of Rochdale on the 29th of November last year.
Yeah.
The very first town in England, UK,
I think it was
to do so.
on the official flagpole. Yeah.
So that's also
Labour
to
had
your
to
credit.
Labour had to be dragged screaming and kicking into that one. But it was Labour that did it in Dundee, where I was the organiser in 1980. And the SNP, the Scottish Nationalist Party, who had a parliamentary representative in the East Dundee constituency, they made my life a complete misery. They savagely attacked us for supporting Palestinian terrorism. It's a funny old world, as Mrs. Thatcher once said.
Imagine that. I want to stay in Britain. I saw a comment coming through from Matthew Burrows, who says, George carries the spirit of Tonybenn. Here is Tonybenn for you.
This is my favourite picture. It is me making Tonybenn laugh. You can't quite see it there, but I put it on social media this week. Tonybenn was my master. He was my political father. He was the greatest Prime Minister that Britain never had. You were lucky to get to know him in his final years. We both attended his funeral. I met him as a young, towering, electrifying socialist leader in the 1970s when he visited Clydeside to the Upper Clyde shipbuilders working. He was then a cabinet minister. There's my grandson with him. Our children have been held by him. My daughter Lucy was held by him when she was a baby, and that's him beside her son in Trafalgar Square. Tonybenn was a truly great man. He was a truly good man, as well as a great man. And these two things are not always the same. And I'll always be proud to have been associated with him. I'll always be grateful for the opportunity to know him so well and to learn so much from him. May God rest his soul, the Right Honourable Anthony Wedgwood Benn. He was a big, big fan of Liverpool, and I've spoken at rallies in St George's Hall in Liverpool with Tonybenn when there was not a dry eye in the house and not a seat to be found. I mention that because Matthew is the last caller tonight from Liverpool on the Greater Israel Project. Welcome, Matthew. What would you like to say?
Hiya, George. I just wanted to say, what is going on with the Arab state? And you mentioned it before. Are they terminally stupid? Do they not realise that once Gaza is being annihilated and the West Bank, Israel will turn its eye to them? Iraq, Saudi Arabia. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, they're terminally purchased, Matthew. Whether they're terminally stupid would depend who you were talking about. But they're terminally purchased. They are terminally indebted to the empire that gave them their thrones and gave them their entire political power and could remove them, at least until recently, until the emergence of Russia and China as alternative poles of support. But during that unipolar world period, most of these rulers only stayed in power because of the support of the United States empire. Some of them are lower than others, some of them more degenerate than others. But in the end, if he who pays the piper calls the tune, he who pays the belly dancer orders the music. Matthew, I'm sorry, I can't let you say more, but if you call back on Sunday, I promise to give you more time. Thanks for your call. Thanks for watching. Thanks to two of the finest guests that you could possibly assemble on any media platform. Never mind an alternative media platform like the mother of all talk shows. I believe those interviews will travel far and live long. Thanks for being with me, with Gayatri and I. We say good night, and God willing, we'll see you on Sunday. Good night.
It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Go get 'em, George.